Hello everyone and welcome back to my bookshelf. Just like in 2020, I did not read many books in 2021. In fact, so few that I can do a video talking about all of them, and that is what this video is going to be. I'm going to be ranking every single book that I read this year from my least favorite to my favorite. The good news is this year I didn't have any books that I hated. I think my lowest ranking is a 2-star and then I go up to a 5-star, so overall it was a pretty successful reading year. So without further ado, let me talk about the 24 books that I successfully completed in 2021. So my least favorite book that I read this year was Of Women in Salt by Gabriel Garcia. I read this for like a book club that my family was doing. My mom's mom is from Cuba, and this book is about women from Cuba, so we kind of wanted to all read it as like a collective Mother's Day gift for my bubby. This book is told in small vignettes. Each chapter kind of follows a different woman, and it's kind of a generational story and kind of just like following different women, some of whom were immigrants, some of whom were Cuban, some of whom weren't. And I think the problem with this book is that it never stopped feeling like exposition. It kind of did the thing that like high school teachers tell you not to do, which is telling instead of showing. I felt like at times didn't really trust the reader to be along with the story. Like it would tell you a detail on one page and then 30 pages later retell you that detail as if you had never been told it in the first place. Some of the individual stories were kind of poignant, but this did kind of just feel like some lines felt like, you know, the author wrote them and knew that like that would be like nice on a t-shirt. It just felt very surface level, which was disappointing because I think it had promise, but just like not something I can see myself recommending to anyone. At number 23, we have The Comedy of Errors by William Shakespeare. I am on this like many-year project to read all of Shakespeare's works in relative chronological order, and Comedy of Errors is what some historians think is the first one, so that's where I started. So I think there's a very big difference between seeing and reading Shakespeare. I cannot evaluate these as like works of theater. I can really just evaluate them as like screenplays, or what is scripts? That's the word. And there was just so much about this that didn't work for me. I don't mind in theater, and especially in Shakespeare, when there's like mistaken identity. I do like it when like someone's dressed up and is deceiving someone, but in the Comedy of Errors, what you have is like all these people mistaking everyone for, like no one knows what's going on. There's not one person who's like aware of everything. It's just like everyone being a dick to each other, and like it's actually anxiety inducing for me. It's not fun, it's not funny, it just like makes me stressed out that like no one knows what's going on. So maybe that's just like a me problem and not a problem with the play, but like I didn't think it was actually very funny. I didn't find many of the jokes that funny, and that's not the same. Like I feel differently about another comedy of his that I read that's coming later on this list, so like I just feel like this really does read as early Shakespeare and is not one that I can ever see myself going back to. Next we have a book that I read for a video, and that is A Gentleman in Moscow by Amor Towles. This is about a man who is sentenced to live in this hotel that he's been living in. He is not allowed to leave because he's kind of like, he was a poet and he's kind of like a danger to Russian society, so they're like, we're not going to send you to jail, we're not going to do anything, but you cannot leave this hotel. And you follow his life through many decades of his life, while you're also kind of like witnessing Russian culture change. To me, this ultimately came across as very dull. It was neither like grand or quaint enough to really like succeed in what it was doing. I love hotel settings, and my favorite parts of this were when like it really like leaned into the hotelness of it. Like he works at one of the restaurants, and I love the restaurant scenes. I love like watching him interact with like people who come to the hotel for a night or whatever, but overall like there are some large plot points, and I feel like those characters and those storylines really weren't well like developed well enough. And then even if you don't have the plot stuff, you could say, well, at least there's the Russian history stuff, and like, you know, it's about the world, not the characters. And I also feel like that was kind of surface level, so it ultimately just like came across as boring. I don't think I said my rating for this or Comedy of Errors. I know I 2'd Comedy of Errors. I think this is probably like a 2.5 if I had to give a number on it, but it was kind of well written. Also, it kind of had like sort of like platitudes and weird lines, kind of like Of Women in Salt had, so just like overall not a great time. Next we have one of the first books I read this year, and it was for a video I was planning to do and then I abandoned it, and that is We Ride Upon Sticks by Quan Berry, which I don't have the dust jacket for anymore, so I'll put up the cover over here. I read this book because it was Books and Lala's favorite book from the year 2020, and I was gonna do this project where I read some of my favorite booktubers' favorite books of the year, and that just like, that video ended up taking a really long time, so I never ended up finishing it. But there were things I loved about this book and things that I didn't love. This is about a high school field hockey team in the year 1989. Is it kind of make a deal with something to be good in the next season, and it turns out that they are really good in the next season. So they do more and more risky things to try to keep up their good field hockey score record. Things that I loved. I did love the 80s vibes, the campy vibes, and this book is told in like the first person plural, like it's we is the narrator, and I did love elements of that, but I thought it started really slowly, and while in the middle, kind of each chapter follows kind of like each of these girls' backstories, so you get to know them really well, but I hated the ending. The ending completely ruined the book for me. I think throughout the book you kind of have this question of like, is there anything supernatural going on, or is it just that like these women have this push that they need to be good in and of themselves? And I feel like the ending was just like a little too clear. It gave me too many answers, and I really didn't like that because I feel like it undid so much of the work of the book. So ultimately a good book, one I can understand people loving, but like for me, the experience was ruined by the end. Next we have one of my most surprising and disappointing books of the year, and that is Housekeeping by Marilynne Robinson. So I gave this 3 stars. This is also not a bad book, but some people whose taste I really like love this book, and I did not love this book, so I was a little bit surprised by that. This is about these 2 girls, Ruth and Lucille, who go to live first with their grandmother, and then when their grandmother dies, the grandmother's siblings, and then ultimately for most of the book, their elusive aunt, who like none of the family know, they go to stay where their mom and mom's siblings all grew up on like this like icy lakeside village. This has very cold atmospheric vibes, a lot to do with family, and kind of like a transience, just like the places between places and the spaces between spaces, and just like it has really good atmosphere. And again, this might come down to like my personal preference, but I think this book just had like way too much to do about family in ways that like the themes really don't interest me. And again, hated the last chapter. Like Ruth, one of the siblings, is telling the story, and for the most part we're kind of like there with her even though it's in the past tense, and I feel like the last chapter was kind of like, so to sum up, here's what happened after, you know, every chapter before this, and I was just like, really? We were so in the moment, and that was like the best thing about the book, was the atmosphere of the moment, and I feel like we didn't need the last chapter, so that was really disappointing to me. But this was really haunting, and if you're interested in like women and the lineage of women and the way family haunts you, I do think this is a book many people could love, and I would recommend you pick up if those themes are interesting to you. Then at number 19, we are still kind of in the 3-star region. We have Play It As It Lays by Joan Didion, which is a book I could see myself liking a lot more on a reread. So this is about a woman in 1960s Hollywood, America, as she tries to make it, and it's very much about Hollywood culture, being a woman in Hollywood in the 60s. It feels very much like a portrait of its time. I felt a remarkable amount of distance from this main character, which I wasn't sure was if that was the point, or if it was the book's fault, or if it was my fault. This is a very heavily nihilistic book. And I think that maybe what I'm trying to get at in my brain, but I'm not yet articulating in the spoken language, is that I found this a very like difficult, bleak read, but I think that was intentional. So again, the problem might not be with the book. I think it did what it set out to do very well. In fact, I think this is even like a 3.5 is what I would give it. But it's not something I ultimately enjoyed reading, and I don't really believe that you have to like enjoy everything you read, you know, in the sense that like it makes you feel good. But yeah, there was just like a block between me and this book that I wasn't able to overcome. I've read Democracy by Joan Didion and liked that significantly more, so I don't think my relationship with Miss Joan is over, but I just was not the biggest fan of this book. Then at number 18, and actually thinking about it, I might have wanted to swap these two, but it's too late. We have No Country for Old Men by Cormac McCarthy, which is about a man who finds this truck with some dead bodies and some, cocaine or heroin? Heroin, and $2 million. And he takes the money, and then naturally both the police and like the people who did that shit are after this man. I think this is a good book, but my reading experience was completely ruined by having seen the movie. I think the movie is so much better, and this isn't the kind of like crime thriller that I think really like holds up on a second read, or like a second go around. Maybe the movie would, because there's more to it, but I just found that like as I was reading it, I wanted to be watching the movie. So like if you haven't seen the movie and you're interested in Cormac McCarthy, I do think this is a good book, but if you've seen the movie, I don't think like you're gonna get anything more from reading the book. Then at 17, we have the other Shakespeare on this list, which is Two Gentlemen of Verona, which is funny because that one is like widely liked, way less than the Comedy of Errors, but I thought this was significantly better. This, meanwhile, had so many of the Shakespearean tropes that I liked. Girl dressed up as a boy, men foolishly in love, a fool who is secretly smarter than the upper class main characters, and I thought it was just generally done very well. Going on theme with this video, terrible ending, like terrible penultimate scene, but I think like ultimately wraps up pretty nicely. But what I appreciated about this, especially after Comedy of Errors, is I just found it funny. I thought that the theme of deception was done well in this. Again, these men are completely bumbling. They're not gentlemen. That's the whole point. They're not two gentlemen in Verona. They're two fools in Verona. I just had a very good time with this one. It's not one that like after this whole project I see it like being really in like the higher ranks of my Shakespeare. It's not going to stay with me, but while reading it, I just had a really good time and I thought it was very funny. At number 16, we have Some Animal by Elie Shipley. So in college, I took this class on trans literature where we read a bunch of books and specifically a lot of trans poets, and Elie Shipley was one of those poets I was introduced to in that class, and I was, for whatever reason, sometime this year, like just going through old reading materials and was in love with some of his poems, so I was like, I need to go pick up one of his full books. So this book is kind of like a collage, if you will, of poetry and other people's words and DSM-5 snippets all coming together to tell this really beautiful story of the body and the body as a thing and an animal, and just like a really beautiful exploration of the self and of transness in both explicit and very subtle ways. It's very moving, and while it's not my favorite thing he's written, some of those individual poems that I read for that class I like a little bit better. He is a poet that I'm going to be keeping my eyes on because I don't have many contemporary poets that I'm keeping my eyes on, but he is absolutely one of them, and I recommend that you check this out if any of the themes that I've mentioned are interesting to you at all. So another project I was going to do this year that I just totally didn't do was reading all of the pieces of literature that Stanley Kubrick ended up making movies about, because a lot of his movies are based on literature, and I started that out by reading Dream Story, which is what Eyes Wide Shut is based on. I think this has a very similar end result to how Eyes Wide Shut does, but in a completely different way. So Eyes Wide Shut is this like very long movie that like traps you into its atmosphere. This, meanwhile, is so short that you're left wondering at the end, just like this, it's the same feeling of dreaminess, but kind of like what just happened to me. Like it was over in a flash, and was any of it real at all? I think I might like Eyes Wide Shut a little bit better just because I think that's one of the best movies of all time, but this explores sex and just like in a different time period. When was this made? Published in 1926. So, you know, like it's exploring these same themes but through a different lens. So I do think it's very interesting, especially if you love that movie. Not like No Country for Old Men. I actually feel like you'd get something more out of reading this. So, highly recommend. At number 15, we have Night by Elie Wiesel, which is hard to rate. This is a book that I deeply respect, but I think is the only book I've ever read that I haven't like rated on Goodreads, just because it's not the kind of book that begs that. This is a memoir, a nonfiction book that Elie Wiesel wrote about his experience as a boy during the Holocaust. I think more than anything, this is just an incredibly well-written piece of history. I think like this, more than anything else I've ever learned in school, in years of Hebrew school, I feel like really gives me an understanding of what it was like. Obviously just one person's experience, but I think a very harrowing, personal, well-communicated experience. So obviously a very difficult read, but if it's something that you are open to and want to read, I think it is an incredibly powerful book that I really do recommend. The last book of the year that I read, coming in at number 13, is The Hour of the Star by Clarice Lispector, which is probably the weirdest book on this entire list. In this book, a man is writing about a woman who's like down on her luck and like is really dumb and like unaware but seems content with life. And I'm shocked that the back of the book doesn't mention the man, because I feel like this book is so much less about her and so much more about the relationship between author and subject. Like I feel like what I understand the most from this is like this is a portrait of a man who is writing about a woman. It is not at all, I mean, it's a little bit about the woman, but like it's so much less about her and more about how he perceives her. I found this very I found this very unsettling and sometimes upsetting, but the whole product was something very, very unique, and it inspires me to want to check out more of Clarice Lispector's work. So yeah, a very, very short little read, very moving, very, very weird. Another poetry book I have on this list is The Captain's Verses by Pablo Neruda. I love Pablo Neruda, he's just one of my favorite poets, and this is a great collection. This is one of my favorite poems of his, If You Forget Me. As I always say when I talk about Neruda, something I love that the publishers always do is, or maybe not always, but at least of the ones that I've read, you get both the Spanish and the English, which I think is so important because poetry is meaning, but poetry is always language. So even though I don't speak fluent Spanish, I think having the ability to read it in either language just like says a lot. And I think sometimes I like to just like read snippets from both, even if I don't completely get everything, just to be able to hear like the sonics of it all. Pablo Neruda might be like the king of love poetry. I think there's something in here for everyone. It's a little long, maybe? Again, like I like my poetry collections to be short, sweet, concise. So I think this took me a little bit of time to get through, but ultimately very, very much worth it. Then at number 11, the last true poetry book I have on this list is The Carrying by Addy LaRue. This took me by surprise because I had heard this had a lot to do with like fertility, motherhood, neither of which are themes that are interesting to me at all. But this ended up being about both that and like the environment and our changing world, and even the poems that were very much explicitly about fertility or lack thereof, I found so well done and so moving. Like I don't want to paint this image that like you have to relate to or be interested in themes to be interested in the art, but I think I was just like skeptical because those are themes I'm like really not interested in. But yeah, I just thought this was like beautiful, beautiful poetry. I love her style. My two favorite poems in this were called The Overpass and Instructions on Not Giving Up, which were both a little bit more about like the world and animals and like how our world is changing. And I just feel like she weaved together these themes so well, and I already own another Addy LaRue book because I want to read more from her. So yeah, very good, excellent modern poetry. We're in the top 10, and at number 10 we have Misery by Stephen King, which is another book I read for that booktuber project I was going to do because Noelle Gallagher, this was her favorite book of 2020. This was the second Stephen King I've ever read after The Shining, and I really enjoyed this. This is about a writer who gets into a car accident, and he ends up under the care of like one of his biggest fans, who is dissatisfied with the proposed ending, or maybe the already existent ending of one of the book series, so she forces him to rewrite it. I thought this as meditation on being a writer was very good, and also as just kind of like chilling mystery thriller was very good. I haven't seen the movie and don't know a lot about this, so I didn't know how it was gonna end, so it was actually like very exciting for me to read, and I don't read a lot of books that are horror or thriller or mystery, so it was kind of nice to like be wondering like, ooh, what's gonna happen? That's not usually something that like I care about when I'm reading a book, like the thrill of it all. And yeah, Stephen King is not like the world's greatest writer, but I do feel like this is a very well done Stephen King book, and I had a hell of a time. At number 9 we have Circle Mirror Transformation by Annie Baker, which is a play. Annie Baker is the queen of my heart. There's another play of hers that's coming up later in this video, and this one is about 6 people of very varying age ranges who are taking a community theater class at this like local community theater, and you watch their rehearsals and you watch their conversations backstage. You watch these small little connections, and it's just brilliant. What I wrote about this was, this is a slow, monotonous play about people who have no business knowing each other, falling in and out of love in awkward moments. I just feel like Annie Baker knows how to write characters so well, even though this is a very short play, and there are these like 7 characters, because there's also the teacher that you have to like get to know. I feel like you get to know them immediately so well. And yeah, just like these small interactions, I still remember a lot of them, and that's saying something about me because I don't often remember scenes or character names. So I found this online. If you find a copy of it, read anything Annie Baker's ever written. I'm officially Annie Baker pilled, if you will. At number 8 we have The Invisible Life of Addy LaRue by V.E. Schwab. This is a fantasy book that came out in 2020 that is about this woman who is forgotten immediately by everyone who sees her. She was originally born in the 1700s and kind of like made this deal with the devil or spirit or something to, you know, like she never wanted to be tied down. And so obviously he took this deal to mean, all right, you'll never be tied down, you're immortal, but no one will ever remember you, until in like present day New York, someone remembers her. I thought this was just exactly the type of fantasy I like. I like mostly the real world was just like a little hint of magic, a little hint of haunting. It was very slice of lifey. I know a lot of people don't love this because it's very long, but not a lot happens. Fine by me. I love books where nothing happens. And yeah, I just thought this was like a very beautiful little book. Despite it being very long, I finished it in 2 days. So this is just like a breezy, beautiful little book about human connection, what it means to love, what it means to be remembered, and is just like one of the only things I've read from the past 10 years and is one of my favorites. I completely lied about being done with traditional poetry because next we have Crystallography by Christian Bach, which is a poetry book, but also a weird one because this is about, it's a poetry book about crystals and like about certain sciencey things such as crystals, snowflakes, snow, geodes, diamonds, but also Christian Bach's father was a crystallographer. So within these kind of scientific mathematical meditations, you have also these very emotional wonderings and stories about his life. It's also so much about language. Somewhere either on the back of the book or somewhere he wrote that a word is a bit of crystal in formation. This is just like a kind of poetry that really speaks to me. I like poetry that is both personal but very abstract. The poetry itself isn't difficult, but its themes are just like, you know, mathematical and of the world and of the abstract. So I thought this was fucking awesome. Probably the poetry book in the world that is the most for me. At number 6 for the year, we have a tiny book, Letters to a Young Poet by Rainer Maria Rilke. I picked this up because Emmy, from who's just a booktuber, she loves this book and it was very short. And this is 10 letters that Rilke wrote to a young poet who was writing to him. It is beautiful. I haven't read any of Rilke's actual poetry, but you can just tell that he breathes words and his soul is composed of poetry, and just like even the lines he's writing to this man in these letters are so poetic and so beautiful and so life-affirming and makes me want to write again. And just like this is the one book in the world I would recommend to every single creative or every single person who needs just a little push, just like a little push in the right direction, because this is astoundingly beautiful in every single way. We're in the top 5, and at number 5 we have Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf. I think I put this on my list last year because I lied about finishing it. I hadn't finished it. I think I finished this in like January or February or something, so I was full of shit. I'm no longer full of shit. I'm sorry for having been full of shit in the past. This takes place over the course of one day as Clarissa Dalloway is planning a dinner party. This has so much to do with interiority and being a woman, and one's status. It also is very much about the wealthy, about I think being a wealthy woman. And I love this book, but simultaneously don't understand why it's the Wolf that gets the most talked about, because I think that The Waves and To the Lighthouse are both better and better introductions to Wolf. So I love this as a fan of her writing and as her explorations of the insides of people, but I still would not recommend this as your first Wolf. Your second Wolf maybe, but don't start with this. I'll be upset with you. I just continue lying, because at number 4 is really my last poetry book, and that is Monument by Natasha Trethewey, which I do not have a copy of right now. This is like a collection of poems taken from a few of her books put together, which is not something I usually love. But I loved it here because I feel like the way she weaves poems about history and poems about her personal history, because we get snippets from books that are like mostly dealing with history, mostly dealing with personal history, mostly dealing with the personal, it all comes together to comment on each other. She is such a talented poet too that like even if this was like a 500-page collection, which again is not something I love to read, I would have had a good time. If you only check out a few of her poems, my favorites from this collection were Biloxophilia, Waterborne, and Native Guard. I just love the way she writes. She's not doing anything, I don't think, like especially new, but she's doing it all incredibly right. My third favorite book of the year, oh, but I haven't mentioned ratings. Wow, look at me. The Monument with a 5-star, and everything right before that was a 4-star, and everything I'm talking about now is also a 5-star. So next, we have Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin, which was stunning in every single way. This is about an American man who is living in Paris in the 1950s, who is engaged to a woman but begins an affair with a man. And I think this is just the single best book exploring sexuality I've ever read. There's not a mention of label, and even the discussions of the text. Sorry, that was my alarm to tell me that I had to stop and start filming, but we're just gonna keep going. The way this book like discusses the taboo, but like in such subtle ways, it's just like, it's completely harrowing. You're totally in this guy's head as he tries to figure out how to live his most authentic life. The prose is gorgeous and elegant, but not overly eloquent. Like it's not flowery, it's very simple, but like just every single word is placed where it needs to be. It's masterful. It's amazing. James Baldwin knows what he's doing. At number 2, we're back to the Queen. We're back to Annie Baker, and this is Joan by Annie Baker. Let me read to you the back. The week after Thanksgiving, a bed and breakfast in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. A cheerful innkeeper, a young couple struggling to stay together, thousands of inanimate objects watching. Oh my fucking god. Annie Baker knows how to write humans. Like, that is her gift as a playwright, is she knows how to create fully fledged humans in every single little body movement and every single line, every single pause. There's so much emphasis on the pauses in this book. And just like, this book is also so much about like our relationships and our past and our haunting and how to being good people or bad people and how there's no such thing. It's just like, there are moments from this play that I feel like are gonna stick with me forever. The question of real haunting or haunting which exists inside the mind and coincidence. And also like there's kind of like, we learn things about this couple slowly throughout the play and it all gets dropped at perfect points. It's just, I think this is my favorite play I've ever read. It's brilliant, it's amazing, and if you have any interest at all in reading plays, like run to pick this bad boy up. Finally, my favorite book that I read in the year 2021 is 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. This book took me 3 tries to complete. I started reading it in January because it was Emmy's favorite book of 2020, so I was like, I'll read this for this video, and I didn't finish it until November or December. This is a multi-generational story about a family who live in this mythical town of Macondo. You watch them get there, and you just follow a lot of years. There is just an entire universe contained within the confines of this book, and this feels like everything. In the way in which The Waves by Virginia Woolf, which is my favorite book of all time, feels like everything, this book feels like everything. The way generations change and the world changes and it's doing so much and never feels like it's trying to do too much. The language in this is gorgeous, and the ways we watch relationships and people change and evolve, it's like, it's everything. That's my review of this book. It is everything. It is everything I want. It is everything it needs to be. It is stunning. I was underlining lines up, down, left, and right. It's got this very convenient little family tree in the beginning because names keep repeating, which I feel like is intentional because history repeats. It's beautiful, it's perfect, it's stunning. Pick it up. So those are the 24 books that I read in the year 2021. Let me know what some of your favorites of the year were, if you've read any of these books, what your thoughts are. I posted my 2022 TBR video, so if you're curious about what I'll be reading next year, you can check that out. But that is all I have for you guys this time, and you'll see me in the next one.